You head up the Early Childhood Cognition Lab. Can you tell me just a little bit about that?
I founded and direct the Early Childhood Cognition and Emotions Lab, which we call EXCEL. We study children's emotions and learning. We study the kinds of factors that can interfere with children's emotions and learning, including poverty and correlated stressors. Things like dangerous neighborhoods, residential moves, family chaos, things that might be more likely to interfere with the lives of children growing up poor. And we study programs that can make a difference and try to provide support to those programs. And in this case, the programming is the arts.
I wanted to ask you about the study now. What were you and your colleagues looking to determine?
About 16 years ago, Sonia Lupien and her colleagues asked, can poverty get under the skin? And the answer was yes. Poverty influences physiological systems that respond to stress. And the result is a host of negative cognitive, emotional, and physical health outcomes for economically disadvantaged children.
What would some of those be, Ellie?
The stressors that children in poverty tend to experience might be things like living in dangerous neighborhoods or having frequent residential relocations, maybe living in crowded or noisy living conditions. They might be more likely to experience stressful family interactions that result from parents' anxiety about trying to make ends meet. And that influences their stress physiology. We have two main systems in our body that respond to stress. And one of those is the autonomic nervous system, which we associate with adrenaline, the fight or flight response. The other is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And the activity of that can be measured by glucocorticoids. The primary glucocorticoid is cortisol. And some cortisol is a good thing. It supports our daily functioning, things like our immune response, our metabolism, our learning, but too much cortisol causes problems. So children who might experience repeated or chronic exposure to stress might end up with chronic elevations in cortisol levels. And that can have a negative impact on learning, emotions, physical health. It can even influence the development of brain areas that are involved in emotions and learning. So it can have negative long-term consequences for children's development.
Can you describe for me how you measured the stress? How many children did you study and over what period of time? And then if you could tell me what steps researchers took.
There were 310 children who participated in the study, and those were children attending Settlement Music School's Kaleidoscope Preschool Arts Enrichment Program. They were 3 to 5 years old, and Settlement's Kaleidoscope Preschool is completely unique as far as we know. Children receive daily music, dance, and visual arts classes in addition to regular homeroom or early learning classes. So it's a Head Start site. It's accredited by the National Association for the Education of Young Children, or NAEYC, but it includes these daily arts classes that are taught in equipped artist studios by fully credentialed artist teachers. So children have a chance to participate in music, dance, and visual arts multiple times each week. And those classes are structured not only to promote children's skill development in the arts, but also in what are called core early learning areas of language and literacy, mathematics, science, social and cultural learning. So if children are learning about math, they might move their bodies to the beat and dance. They might beat on a drum to the beat in music. They might repeat a subject with variation in visual arts to learn about patterns. And in the present study, children were randomly assigned based on their preschool class to participate in different types and numbers of arts and homeroom classes on different days of the week. And we measured cortisol in the morning to establish a baseline, and then after various arts and homeroom classes. And cortisol can be measured non-invasively through saliva. So we stick these Q-tip type things in children's mouths. They're called sorbettes. They hold them under their tongue for about a minute. Then we take them out and place them in a tube to freeze them and later analyze them. And we analyzed children's cortisol at 4 different times of day on 2 different days of the week at the start, middle, and end of the preschool year. So in total, about 7,000 cortisol samples were analyzed for the present study.
And what did researchers find? Did you find trends from that?
Yes, children showed lower cortisol levels after music, dance, and visual arts classes compared with homeroom.
What did that suggest to you?
It suggests the arts classes may be helping to lower children's stress levels. Now, we don't know for sure that it's the artistic components of those arts classes. It could be some other component. It might be that the teachers of those classes are particularly passionate and engaged in what they're doing. We know that teacher engagement can influence children's learning and emotions. But having witnessed the teachers in the early learning or homeroom classes, I can say they're pretty engaged and passionate about what they're doing as well. And the fact that we found similar effects for music, dance, and visual arts, which had different teachers, suggests to me that there might really be something about the arts that's helping to lower children's stress levels.
Is this something that is particular just for this subset of children? You studied children from a disadvantaged area. Is there something about the music art participation rather than therapy particularly important?
I think it's particularly important to study this for economically disadvantaged children because children growing up poor are disproportionately likely to experience stress in their lives. But there's no reason to think necessarily that children across economic strata couldn't benefit from the arts.
What kind of suggestions would you have for parents from the results of this study?
Well, as parents, we wish that our children's lives could be carefree, that they didn't have to go through stress, but of course that's not realistic. All children are going to experience stress, and if your child has to deal with poverty or racism or other inequities, they might face more than their fair share. But the good news is there are things we can do to help them deal with stress, and the arts may help.
Was there one particular kind that seemed to help? Did you measure after music, after dance, after art, or is it any of the three?
Yeah, we did measure children's cortisol after each of those, after music, dance, and visual arts, and we found similar stress reduction effects. So I would say to parents, if there's a particular arts modality that your child is drawn to, if they really like dance, then consider pursuing that. Consider finding ways for them to be involved in dance. My own son was particularly drawn to music, so we've pursued that. He's studied violin for the past 3 years. He's 6 now.
Does it have to be a lot every day?
This study hopefully sets the stage for further research to ascertain the mechanisms of arts impact, how is it having these effects, and what exact type or level of arts engagement might be necessary to have such positive outcomes. There are a lot of things we still don't know, so I wouldn't assume that any arts experience is going to lead to lower stress levels. If you participate in vigorous dance or listen to hard rock, you might even have an increase in cortisol levels, at least in the short term. And also if your child were to participate in competitive experiences in the arts, I would expect they might have an increase in cortisol levels, at least in the short term, because we know competition tends to have that effect. It raises our stress level. So we still have a lot to learn about exactly what type and level of arts engagement might have stress reduction benefits, but we know children are naturally interested in the arts, and the arts are valuable for the art's sake. So even if your child doesn't necessarily have lower cortisol levels after taking piano lessons, they still will have learned to play the piano, and what can be bad about that?
Are there additional implications from this study?
Well, one thing that comes to mind, I think this study highlighted the benefits associated with Settlement Music School's Kaleidoscope Preschool Arts Enrichment Program, and when we parents select preschool programs, I think we tend to focus on, will my child learn their letters, their numbers, their shapes and colors? And I would stress to parents that social emotional outcomes are just as important, even if they might be harder to measure. So if I were selecting a preschool, I would consider programs that had an emphasis on play and on creative activities like music, dance, and visual arts, because those programs might be the best match for promoting our children's long-term flourishing.
Is there anything I didn't ask you, Ellie, that you want to make sure people know?
Well, one thing I think is important to say is that the stress reduction benefits of the arts that we documented were modest. So we can't expect the arts to erase entirely the impact of poverty on children's lives. And I think it's important that we all try to work toward a world where no child has to grow up in poverty. Working toward that ideal does require paying attention to the stressful circumstances that often accompany poverty and considering what we can do to promote positive outcomes for children who are currently growing up poor, and the arts may be one of those ways.
Ellie, when you say modest, how can I describe that?
What I would say is there are a host of factors influencing children's stress physiology. Things about their neighborhood, things about their family and household, things about their school environment. The arts is just one component and cannot be expected to make up for everything else.
Ellie, if you can tell me a little bit about your background.
I graduated from Haverford College and then went on to the University of Delaware to do my master's and doctoral work. My PhD is in psychology with a specialization in clinical psychology and a particular focus on children at risk. I've studied children who face particular risks due to poverty and correlated stressors.